Jurassic Park, the silver screen Goliath that captured the hearts, minds, and other organs of admiration of generations of movie audiences the world over. In Jurassic Park, we see a group of people from all walks of life travel to the Costa Rican island Isla Nublar, the site of a theme park and research center that has successfully resurrected dinosaurs from beyond the grave. However, in an act of corporate sabotage, the power to the park is brought down, and with it, the enclosures that kept the dinosaurs contained. Though the genetically engineered dinosaurs are relentless, and many people lose their lives to the creatures, enough of the visitors survive long enough to bring power back to the park, allowing them to send out a distress call. They are picked up by a helicopter, and after watching the dinosaurs claim the island as their own, the group escapes from Jurassic Park. But what if they hadn't? What if our ragtag group were left to fend for themselves? Today, we seek counsel from the smatterings of untapped inspiration crushed underfoot on the cutting room floor. Today, we pretend that our character's rotor wing rescue was met with misfortune upon landing on Isla Nublar. Today, we imagine what may have happened next if the survivors got trapped in Jurassic Park. Dr. Alan Grant felt his head ache from the mental fog he was trapped in. His eyes and his brain had desynced, not unlike how they would during long hot days digging in Montana, leaving him unable to process what was happening right in front of him. His body, however, sprung to life like he was a high school running back again, dragging the towering frame of Dr. Malcolm back to the Jeep as if he were no heavier than a rag doll. Alan wasn't sure what was echoing louder in his ear, the pained grunts of protest from Dr. Malcolm, the frenzied cries of Lex, distraught at what was unfolding before them, or the distant screams of the helicopter pilot being torn asunder by the pair of Dilophosauruses. Dr. Grant was, however, sure of one thing. If they couldn't get away from the helicopter pad, and get away fast, none of that would matter. As Dr. Grant hurriedly flung Malcolm, Ellie, and the kids into the Jeep, his eyes remained fixed on the silhouette of the helicopter, shaking violently from the force of the ravenous beasts inside. Even as Hammond sped away with all the power the Jeep could muster, Alan's gaze remained frozen. They may have gotten away from the Dilophosauruses, but they were still far from safe. Far from it. Spared no expense rolling out the red carpet, did you, John? A silent glare was all John Hammond offered Dr. Malcolm as he continued accelerating, negotiating the twists and turns of the loose gravel road with the prowess of a Formula One champion. As Dr. Grant's gaze wandered further and further into the distance, his mind wandered further and further into itself. He wanted nothing more than to drift away from the horrors of this place, to catch the wind on his face and fly away, to fly back to a place where none of this was real. But as his mind drifted off into the bright blue skies, there was a sound from behind him, one almost too soft to even hear, but one that snapped him back to earth like the pull of a bungee cord. In the seat behind him, Alan saw them. Lex, crumpled into Ellie's right shoulder, quietly whimpering as Ellie ran her hand through her hair, softly reassuring her as she held back tears of her own. And little Tim, sunken into Ellie's left shoulder, the bright-eyed look the little boy with the love for life once had, was now hollow. The curiosity, the excitement, all but snuffed out. These kids, in a short few days, had seen more than many would see in a lifetime. It was more than anyone deserved to ever go through, and now these kids would carry it for the rest of their lives. Why? Why did it have to be this way? Why should they have to suffer in ways so beyond their control? They shouldn't. They wouldn't. From here on out, Alan Grant would see to it that this waking nightmare would come to an end. If not for their sake, then for the kids. Grant whirled around in his seat. Mr. Hammond, get us back to that bunker and get us away out of here. Hammond turned back to the road, not saying a word as he pinned the accelerator to the floor. The Jeep came skidding to a halt, mere inches from the wall of the concrete bunker, as though Hammond's will alone was the only thing the vehicle responded to. Hammond leapt from the vehicle, moving with the vigor he thought had left him decades ago, as he threw open the door to the bunker, then turned to hurriedly guide his grandchildren inside. Hammond ushered Tim and Lex through the entrance before turning to Dr. Grant and Dr. Sattler, beckoning them in as they hauled Dr. Malcolm towards the steel door. As Hammond crossed the threshold, a guttural, deafening roar echoed across the park. Hammond looked to the horizon, a grimace stretching across his face as he looked upon the park. The lush green canopies that held the most magnificent marvels of the scientific world, a sanctuary of discovery, of opportunity, stared back at John. The curtain of optimism had crumbled and fallen away. In its place, twisted branches, cold winds, and wicked demons clad in the skins of long-dead creatures were the ensemble that performed before his eyes. What had once inspired hope in John Hammond's mind now brewed a festering sensation of contempt. Hammond sneered, turning away from his wayward creation, before slamming the door to the bunker. Absolutely not! Alan Grant glanced towards Hammond, who seemed seconds away from blowing his top like a volcano. The furious energy emanating from him was enough to keep even Dr. Malcolm from breathing, for fear of being subject to a primal ferocity that would make the dinosaurs quiver. Have you even the faintest idea what you're doing? You have a responsibility to us! Fulfill it! Dr. Alan Grant turned to Lex and Tim, offering a faint smile. It's gonna be okay. Dr. Ellie Sattler looked on as Alan rested his hands on the kids' shoulders. Your grandpa's gonna make sure we get off this island, even if he needs to send the T-Rex after them. Tim's gaze shifted down, and Lex turned to face the wall, forcing Alan's hand away. Seemed it was a little too soon to be making light of the beast that had turned their lives upside down. Alan sighed, shrugging in defeat as he stood to meet Ellie. Despite their dire circumstances, and Alan's apparent deficit in parental instinct, Ellie wore a smile that lit up the bunker. So, why exactly did you think this would be good for me? Hey, for what it's worth, I think you've done great so far. You ask me why I never leave my digs or try new things. Because with digging, I can see problems, I can find answers. I always know what to do, but with them? Alan threw his arms up, too exasperated to try and finish his thought. Ellie chuckled. Well, I'll be sure to draft up a performance review for you when we get back. Assuming we do. Alan. People are dying! There are children with us! All eyes fell on Hammond. The desperate cracks in his voice turned the stomachs of all within the bunker as a gnawing feeling of dread settled over the room. Within the walls of their claustrophobic concrete crypt, every single person hung on every word John Hammond was saying. Now it seemed they hung by a thread, waiting in silence to see if the next words from the man's mouth would cut them loose. God damn you! Hammond slammed the phone into its cradle, his head slumping down as he leaned into the wall. Slowly, Hammond turned to meet the eyes of the group. The nervous expectation he felt from the eyes on him struck a hole into his very soul. Hammond's heart sunk in his chest, resting atop the knot in his stomach. This shouldn't be his responsibility to bear. He never should have been put in this position. He wanted to rewind, to start over, and make what had happened here nothing more than the ravings of a lunatic. Yet even with the world's greatest technologies at his command, even with his ability to recreate the past, to mold it as he saw fit, there could be no undoing what had happened, or what he would have to do now. A word, if you please. Hammond beckoned for the adults to gather by the table where Dr. Malcolm was trying in vain to nurse his wounded leg. They huddled together, staring Hammond down. Hammond spoke, his voice so hushed that even though he himself spoke the words, he was almost not able to hear them. They're refusing to send another helicopter. What? Ellie mustered the word as though it were the last breath of air she held in her lungs. They say they won't send it so long as life or limb risk exists for the flight crew. As if they're the only bloody ones they need to worry about. Dr. Malcolm piped up, his paling face contorting as he shifted his weight to his elbows. Well, if anyone here's been waiting to share their expert proficiency at piloting a helicopter, now would be a good time to come clean. Wait a minute, what about sending a boat? That's how the workers got out of here. Why not have it come back? Ellie leaned slightly closer to Hammond, the muscles in her face tightening until it seemed the skin would tear. The mainland has grounded all conventional flights and ferries until the threat of the storm has passed. They'll only send a boat once they're certain it's safe. Well, then when are they set to arrive? When can we expect to meet them? John cast his head down. John. Grant leaned forward, searching for Hammond's gaze with intensity to rival the Raptors. What did they tell you? Hammond's fingers curled into his palms, going white as his knuckles strained and stretched until it seemed they would break. After an eternity of silent torment, Hammond's eyes met those of his guests, the color of his face now matching his knuckles. They've made no promises, until they contact us again. The air in the bunker hung heavy, the silence now more oppressive than ever, as if it had seeped into their very bones and purged every ounce of life with the dead empty air that now filled the room. They all knew what this meant. They all knew what he was about to say, though they all silently prayed their fears would not become the truth. The words left Hammond's lips. We're on our own. I don't like this. Yeah, right. 'Cause if we keep going, we'll all blow up. Lex flinched from Tim's sudden grip on her arm as he grinned from ear to ear at the sight of her torment. We'll be all right. Alan muttered softly, trying not to speak too loud as he carefully positioned the shotgun shell. He didn't know how they managed it, but they now had a tower of 10 shells stacked one on top of the other. Alan eyed the top of the tower, searching for even the slightest hint of gravity's interference as he seated the shell on top of the stack. As it wavered ever so slightly, it settled, then became still. Look at that! Alan clapped his hands, turning to the kids with a grin on his face. We'll get this thing up to the roof at this rate. You know, you could probably find a deck of cards if you look through some of those boxes. Ellie stared at Alan as she gently pulled the needle she was feeding through Dr. Malcolm's leg, her half-smile, half-smirk not sharing even an ounce of the playful imitation of her colleague. Oh, that's all right. We're having more than enough fun, aren't we? Lex, refusing to take her wide-eyed stare off the improvised game, managed a weak smile for Alan, while Tim shook his arm, demanding to go higher. Ellie turned back towards Dr. Malcolm's undressed thigh, looping the needle and thread from one end of his wound to the other, fully concentrated on reuniting skin with skin. I don't know, Alan. You really shouldn't be letting the kids play with things like that. I agree. Tim, Lex, put Alan on timeout for us, will ya? Ian Malcolm's sly grin magnetically attracted the gaze of Alan Grant, as it did with everyone he met. Yet despite how overtly obnoxious it was, Alan Grant couldn't help but return the smile. You know, you should think of this as a teachable moment. Alan leaned back, resting his weight on his hands. If you can show them there's nothing to be afraid of, then you can understand it better. And once you understand it better, you'll be able to man the thumper for me when we get back to Snakewater. You think you'd like that, Tim? Tim nodded, a smile crossing his face at the thought of being able to help his larger-than-life hero. Truly an intriguing hypothesis. And, what, pray tell, is the next chapter of your lesson when you come to realize certain things are meant to be feared? Ian's snark-fueled grin contorted into a scowl. Ellie wiggled the needle through a particularly red and swollen area of the jagged incision, staring daggers into the eyes of the self-proclaimed chaotician. Between those three adults, there existed no less than 7 degrees worth of intellect. But it hardly required that much intelligence to see which direction Dr. Malcolm's jab was taking them. No matter how hard the group tried to occupy their minds, the truth of their situation was becoming more and more impossible to hide from by the day. The dinosaurs that roamed the earth above were as present a threat as they ever were. And no matter how safe they were in that bunker, these manifestations of man and nature colliding together would always be up there waiting for them. And with every passing day, it was only a matter of time before they'd have to come face to face with them again. We learn from it, then we evolve, same way we always have. Before Dr. Malcolm could retort, John Hammond materialized. In his gaze was a glimmer of inspiration, but not the same kind he wore when boasting about the top speed of his Tyrannosaur. May I have a word? Alan patted Tim and Lex on the back, bidding them to carry on with their game as he moved to join the committee congregating by Ellie's makeshift operating table. Something in Hammond's gaze left his audience unsettled, with the same collective thought creeping through their minds since the day they shut that bunker door. They were convinced fate was coming knocking, and that it would enter their lives from the tip of John Hammond's tongue. The trio all secretly fantasized that he had come to reveal a bottle of finely aged scotch that he wished to share. Heaven knows they could all do with a glass or two of that right now. Well, I've tried for the mainland again, and it would seem they're still asleep. John, Ellie leaned towards Hammond, causing Dr. Malcolm to squirm as she accidentally bumped his leg. Calling them over and over isn't gonna get them here any quicker. We have to wait for them to call us back. John Hammond's face remained unmoved, his eyes cold as stone as he surveyed their surroundings. You may be right, my dear Dr. Sattler, but I've thought on how to improve our chances until then. As you all know, I was told that we would likely expect to be retrieved by ferry. Every boat that leaves the mainland must interface with the port authorities, providing various pieces of documentation, which the port controllers file onto a digital timetable to ensure approval. With this, of course, being an operating expense, we receive copies of those schedules on our terminals, letting us know when we've requisitioned transport. Alan peered up at Hammond, now intrigued, alarmed, and hopeful all at once. So you mean to say if someone's coming for us, then we will have a copy in our database to prove it? Oh, now we're talking. Ian propped himself on his elbows, his vigor beginning to return. So, what does the database have to say then? Therein lies the problem. Once again, that stomach-churning dread returned, sending shivers down their spines. We need to access the terminal to find that information. The only terminals we have in the park. Hammond paused, knowing full well the delay would do him no good. Are up in the control center. A deafening crash erupted behind them. The tower of shotgun shells had clattered to the floor, the kids now looking on in abject horror. No, we can't leave! The monsters are out there waiting! Lex ran to her grandfather, squeezing his arm tight, with a pleading look that caused what little resolve the people in that bunker had left to crumble. Please tell me we aren't going back in there, please! Lex, Hammond put his hands on Lex's shoulders. I know how scary things have been for you and Tim. I'm doing everything I can to get us away from here. But if we're going to get out of here, then we need to see what is on those computers. Once we do, we'll know what to do next. Well, that would certainly be a first, wouldn't it? Although Dr. Malcolm's snide remark would have suggested otherwise, he, along with every other person in that room, silently prayed that what Hammond was suggesting was true. After being trapped underground for so long, the days blurring together with no end in sight, this was the first time thoughts of escape had carried weight. If there was a chance of getting out of there, of getting away from the chaos that had proven beyond even Dr. Malcolm's ability to grasp, how could anyone even dream of letting that chance pass? Alan Grant moved across the bunker, shaking the ground at his feet as he homed in on Muldoon's gun cabinet. Dr. Grant? Lex ran across the room, grabbing a hold of Alan's arm as he reached for one of the shotguns. We don't know what it's like up there, Lex. Nobody but me goes until we're sure it's safe up there. Alan filled his pockets with shells, paying no mind to Lex's efforts to hold him back. But I want to help! Alan stopped in his tracks. Lex's voice cracked as tears began forming. Please, I just want to help. He saw it now. The same thing that had been driving him all along. In her eyes was a desire to make things right. A fiery passion that made Grant realize why his connection with these kids had become so strong. Why it meant so much to him now. And you will. Alan rose to his feet, walking Lex over to the radio cabinet, plucking two of the handheld receivers from the rack. I need you to take this, set it to channel 2. Alan extended the walkie-talkie to Lex. Now when I get to that computer, I will have no idea what I'm looking at. Lex plucked the walkie-talkie from his hand, turning the dial to max volume. When I call you, you're gonna be in charge of walking me through finding those files. Can you do that for me? Lex's face softened, a small smile emerging on her face as she nodded in affirmation. I'm going with you. Behind them, Ellie stood at the ready, brandishing a rifle as she loaded her own pockets with magazines. Not letting you out of my sight again. Lex and Tim seated themselves at the table, clutching the walkie-talkie tight. Dr. Malcolm shifted on his elbows, watching as Hammond led the fossil hunters up the dark staircase that accessed the control room. Hammond fumbled with his keyring, searching in the dim light for the one that would allow them back into the center. Remember, our priority is to find out if they've sent someone to retrieve us, but we should make certain the park's security measures are still operational in case we need to make a trip across the island. An amber-colored key turned in Hammond's hand, a faint click sounding out as the locking mechanism released. Behind the thin layer of glass of the porthole, the control center remained still, offering no sign or assurance of what lie in wait. Now, ideally, if the ship has left port, records of arrival and departure will be present in the database. A lump built in Alan's throat as sweat began to bead on his forehead. He swallowed nervously, focusing in on the sound of the spittle in an effort to ignore the knot of fear building inside him that threatened to swallow him whole. Considering the situation, however, it might be necessary to keep an open mind. Ellie looked over at Alan, the skin round her mouth pulled tight as she bit down on her lip. She was struggling to keep the fear down just as much as he was. But in spite of that, she forced a smile, doing what she could to reassure Alan that she was there for him. At least he had someone to bounce off of while facing certain death. It would be worthwhile, I think, to check our incoming and outgoing staff communications. There is perhaps a chance that our rescue will happen via less than official means. Hammond reached for the door handle, slowly and deliberately clamping down on it. He offered the duo one final look of assurance as the stark, empty room loomed beyond. Stay safe in there, and try not to bring back any unexpected guests, if you don't mind. The handle turned, and with a faint pop that echoed like a gunshot, the door swung open. White fluorescent lights bathed the space with a sickly glow, inviting in the same way that a surgeon would invite a patient to go under the knife. A low mechanical whir radiated from the fixtures like a wasp nest, leaving any who might have tuned into its harsh melody utterly unable to perceive any other sound. This hum was quick to invade the mind of Alan Grant. Not even his own footfalls registered as he slowly scanned the room, methodically picking apart any and every object he saw. Despite the mental force field provided to Alan and Ellie by their firearms, they wouldn't allow themselves to accept even the slightest notion of safety. Not until every nook and cranny of that control center was clear of anything larger than a breadcrumb. Alan crept slowly past the windows flanking the corridor, carefully managing every step as if every floor tile were a landmine. Ellie tiptoed beside the fossils on the wall, staring down the door to the hallway, breathing so softly that not even the air molecules in front of her moved. They looked to the hallway. They looked at each other. They looked at the shattered frame of the window where the raptors had chased them down. They remembered being face to face with the cold, unfeeling beasts that had nearly ended their lives. The terrible conjuring of nature's power, a power they could never hope to control. Then they stopped, crouched side by side, shoulder to shoulder, as they sat completely still, willing the very blood pumping through their veins to cease for fear of it giving them away. For what seemed a millennia, the two stayed that way. Then, despite every fiber of his being begging him to remain still, Alan reached for the walkie-talkie. The room is clear. We're heading to the computer. Hey, don't look at me. Lex is in charge here, remember? Alan huffed, resigned to Ellie's choice to kick her feet up. In spite of her background, in that she was actually able to somewhat use a computer, she seemed content to watch Alan as he navigated the Fusion file manager with all the finesse of a caveman pounding stones together. As Ellie had so smugly put it, this was a teachable moment.
I'm sorry, Mr. Grant. It's hard doing this without actually being there.
If you had told Alan at the start of his career in paleontology that he would be invited to a millionaire magnate's tropical island, nearly be killed by the very same thing he dug the graves of his whole adult life, and learned computer science from a teenager all in the same amount of time, he would have sent you away for psychiatric evaluation before you even finished the sentence. But things were different now, for everyone. And if they hoped to get through this mess, they would all have to adapt. That's all right, Lex. You're doing just fine. Remember to take your time and not to go too fast. I'm an old dog learning a new trick here. Alan pushed the mouse along the tabletop, imagining himself as Tarzan swinging through some lush Amazonian jungle as he watched the cursor fly through a seemingly infinite web of branches leading God knows where.
What do you call a dog who digs for dinosaurs?
Seeing as Tim hadn't been especially talkative during their stay, Alan was somewhat surprised to hear his voice come through the speaker. I don't know, Tim. What? Alan held the walkie-talkie to his ear as he clicked on the folder titled Administration.
A barkeologist.
Alan chuckled. Though Tim wasn't among the greatest of comedians, the boy's giddiness was a welcome change from the crushing weight of existential dread. Let's see here. Supply chain, maintenance, facilities. Alan drifted through the seemingly endless catalog of titles before landing on one that seemed worthy of his attention. Transportation. Let's see what you have. The cursor leapt from tree to tree, the clicks reverberating through the empty chamber that had once been the brain of the park, and echoing on into the desolate halls beyond the control room. Ellie perked up ever so slightly at the distant reverberation, before returning her attention to Alan. There it is! That's the one! Upon seeing the file folder popping out at them like a pot of binary gold, Ellie squeezed Grant's shoulders in hopeful excitement as he scrolled the contents of the folder. Ferry schedule, Ela Nublar. And just as soon as they felt their spirits lift, the contents of the document caused them to sink back down. There's nothing. Alan slowed his breathing, waiting for a break in the silence from the other end of the walkie-talkie. The lump returned to his throat as the silence began to strangle him.
Are you certain you haven't missed anything? You need to find the arrival and departure times. That's what we need to know.
Alan struggled to speak, his breath catching in his throat. It's right here in front of me. Last ferry made landfall with Costa Rica on June 12th. Nothing has come or gone since. As John's voice crackled through the walkie-talkie, bumbling about checking for clerical errors and reviewing faxes, Ellie shifted, her ears drawn to the echoing reverberation within the hall. But this time, she wasn't so sure they were coming from the clicks of the mouse. Okay, let me see. Alan? What is it? Ellie grabbed hold of Alan, whipping him around in his chair. Agitated from being pulled away from the task that would make or break their hope of getting out, Alan pulled away. Ellie, what a... The circular metallic frame of the shattered porthole to the hallway met Alan's gaze. But now, there was a set of eyes staring back. Perched inside the remains of the shattered window, there was a figure the size of a rooster, its striped, scaly hide stretched tightly over its tiny frame. The creature's head tilted back and forth, enchanted by the sight of the giants adorned in denim and khaki. Alan's eyes locked with the creature, his hand shifting slowly from the mouse to the radio, not daring to let the creature out of his sight. Tim, did you ever learn about a dinosaur called the Compsognathus? Alan watched as the reptilian creature swayed side to side in the window frame, following Alan's every movement. All the while, the distant clicks in the hallway became louder and faster.
Yeah, they were super small, like chickens. I think they were scavengers. They'd eat whatever the big dinosaurs couldn't.
The clicks were now unmistakable. The pattering sound of dozens of tiny footfalls reverberated louder than ever as they came closer and closer. The Compsognathus before them let out a shrill screech, craning its head to the sky as it chanted an ear-piercing verse in the window frame. Ellie's hand once again found Alan's arm, squeezing tightly, threatening in doing so to tear his arm straight from its socket. Alan? Tim? Do you know whether or not they move in packs? John Hammond's voice tore through the other end of the radio.
Get out of that room now!
The Compsognathus flew haphazardly from its perch, knocked down by the force of his brethren who now poured into the control room by the dozens. Ellie shot frantically into the writhing mass that tore across the floor, dragging Alan away from the computer station as he fumbled for the shotgun. Dr. Grant fired blindly into the writhing pool of scales and teeth, stumbling backwards into desks and chairs as he fumbled to get away. A frantic scream pierced his ear. One of the dinos had leapt up on Ellie's shoulders. She batted her arms blindly in the air, desperately trying to make contact as the beast sank its teeth into her scalp. Alan grabbed hold of the thing's neck, hurling it across the room with all his strength, even as the sensation of tiny fangs sinking into his shins threatened to bring him to his knees. He kicked frantically at the sea of beasts forming at his feet, clumsily trying to reload while struggling to ignore the pain of the creatures taking him apart piece by piece. "Come on!" Ellie stood next to the bunker door, one hand on the knob, the other clumsily waving the rifle in the direction of Alan and the compies. Alan leapt away from the circle of compies, crushing one underfoot as he vaulted like an Olympian sprinter for the door. Ellie's rifle clicked, demanding more ammo as the wall of creatures closed in. As Alan dove through the entry, Ellie threw herself into the dark antechamber behind him, slamming the door just in time for the scraping of claws to commence a symphony of bloodlust against the door. Ellie collapsed into Alan, a stream of tears and blood pooling on his shoulder. Alan, ignoring the fiery sensation radiating through his legs, embraced Ellie, holding back tears of his own as he did. These two scholars of the dead, having dedicated their lives to knowing everything there ever was to know about these creatures, were among the few living people to face the fury of these beasts in real life. And through these trials they had faced and conquered by the skin of their teeth, they now knew that some graves were better left unturned.
Well, Dr. Sadler, for what it's worth, I think you're making one hell of a fashion statement.
Ellie's fingers gingerly ran from her temples to her forehead. The bandages encasing Ellie's head were holding. No blood seeped through. Despite this reassurance, she felt constricted beneath her gauze hat, as though her head were slowly being pressed in a vice. At least she would have some entertainment, courtesy of Dr. Malcolm's amusement. "How's your leg doing?" Ian reached down, pulling at the leg of his pants to examine the ragged scar.
Oh, absolutely fantastic. I'll tell you, there's nothing quite like disfiguring mutilation to get me wondering about a career in cross-country.
Alan focused in on the safety pin as it entered the fabric wrapping his shins. Tim sat next to him in a trance, holding the end of the bandage tight for Alan, watching in awe as he wove the needle up and through the bandage with surgical precision. How did he know where to poke without poking himself? "Okay, Tim, that's good, thank you." Tim released the bandage, his trance ending as the pin caught the fabric.
"How does it feel?"
"Oh, it's not so bad. The aspirin's starting to help a bit." Alan rose from his seat on the ground, groaning as he walked towards Ellie and Ian at the table. Hammond pulled up a chair, collapsing into the seat with a weary sigh.
"Well, I don't think I'll be offending anyone when I say that went poorly."
"You know, John, I would dare to say that's an understatement." Alan leaned into the table, propping his weight on his elbows as he extended his legs, trying to find a position that would afford relative comfort from the pain.
"Grandpa, what happens now?"
Hammond offered a smile, though not one person in that room believed them to be genuine anymore.
"Nothing we can't handle, Tim."
Hammond placed a hand on Tim's shoulder.
"I know things seem awful right now, but I swear to you, with a little bit more time and a bit of creativity, we will bring our situation back under control."
And there it goes again.
The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Ian Malcolm, his trademark look of cool, carefree swagger, now traded for a mask of indignant fury.
What is it going to take for you to admit that you're in over your head here?
"Dr. Malcolm." Hammond's eyes bore holes into Ian, his chipper facade crumbling as he spoke.
I would have hoped you, of all people, would possess the intelligence to understand misery does not make for good company. Our situation is difficult, no doubt, but it will not be made easier if all you have to offer is this unending blabber about how correct your evaluation of our problems is.
Absolutely no sense of self-awareness. You built this shrine of self-fulfillment in a pit of quicksand, then tricked yourself into believing that if you could build faster than you sank, you would come out on top. This entire park is a hodgepodge of compounded mistakes that never went accounted for. And as much as I hate to keep saying I told you so, it seems that it took you and I being trapped in this bunker together for you to realize just how deluded you really were. So let me ask you this, John. At what point are you gonna set your ego aside and actually—
Enough, Dr. Malcolm!
The bunker became still. The air, now too heavy to breathe, was smoldering from the heat emanating off John Hammond, threatening to boil everything in that room from the inside out if it dared to incur further wrath.
Your nihilistic ramblings are no longer welcome. Not by me, not by anyone else here.
Hammond glanced down at his grandchildren, their eyes cast down, remaining silent while their guardians spiraled further and further into the misery of their argument.
If we hope to get out of this place, then every one of us must share the same understanding. Whether you can appreciate what must be done or not, the only way we will regain control of our situation is if we put pause on petty self-fulfillment.
I think nature has its own plans, John. Hammond's eyes shot up at his former representative in the field of paleontology. Alan felt his eyes become glassy from the force of Mr. Hammond staring through his soul, but he pressed on. You told us all right from the start that the genome sequences were incomplete. I mean, how could they not be after being stuck in the muck for millions of years? But your choice to fill in the gaps with frog DNA, well, there's species of frogs out there that can change their own reproductive organs when an environment is devoid of mating potential. It happened here, John. Even though you took every step you could think of to make sure it wouldn't, it happened anyway. Now, I don't want to play devil's advocate any more than the next person, but the fact is, we can't be sure of what we're dealing with anymore. The fact is, this park doesn't need us anymore. Well, even if it were possible to come up with a fail-safe now, how could you be sure that wouldn't fail too? Ellie rested her arms on the table, twisting her head slightly in answer to the itching pain running along her scalp. Because if the animals can circumvent efforts to change their genetic code, how exactly is depriving them of lysine meant to keep them at bay? I mean, lysine's only one of a multitude of amino acids that can't be naturally produced within animals, humans among them. If an ecosystem deprives a creature of these acids, they'll just seek them elsewhere. I'm sorry to say this, but unless you've got some kind of ace up your sleeve, the only way these dinosaurs are gonna bend now is through brute force. Hammond's head slumped low. As the words echoed within his mind, so too did they echo off the walls of their underground hovel. Though the inhabitants of the bunker could now breathe again, the silence in the bunker was no less heavy. The success of their debate was hollow. No amount of verbal dissection, no matter how studious, would help them escape these facts, nor the savage beasts that perpetuated them. Good. Now, assuming we agree that we still need to get off this island, I think we can also agree none of us are really in any kind of shape to go back up there. So, unless you plan on volunteering the kids to— Tim launched off the floor where he sat, storming out of the room and clambering up the staircase to the outside. Just as suddenly as he had gotten up, Tim slipped outside, slamming the door shut with a thunderous crash. Alan, Ellie, and Lex were on their feet, flying up the staircase after the young boy.
In less time than it took for a heart to beat, Hammond and Malcolm were alone. Hammond scoffed, ambling towards the staircase to the surface.
You truly are a student of chaos, aren't you?
With the click of the door latch, the bunker returned to silence. And despite the rationality of his deductions, Ian Malcolm was alone, with only those thoughts to offer him company.
Tim!
The shrill chorus of cicadas singing from the darkness of the trees deafened the group as they listened intently for signs of life from Tim.
Tim, where are you?
The volume with which the trio shouted was sending them into a panic. No one dared imagine what they would do if they had to run off into the darkness, away from the only measure of safety they had left. Despite this, their hushed shouting was only met with silence. Everyone held their breath, praying for young Tim to show them a sign.
Whoa!
The call echoed from above, causing the group to shrink into the ground at their feet. The soft inflection of the imitation call sent all 4 sets of eyes upwards. Atop the roof of the bunker, Tim cupped his hands to his mouth, blowing hard in an effort to start a conversation with the creatures beyond the trees.
Tim, what are you doing?
Lex scrambled up the concrete buttress flanking the door of the bunker, lifting herself up to the top slab to sit at her brother's side.
Trying to get a metasaur to come shut you all up. Tim, how could you say something like that?
John craned his eyes to meet Tim as Alan and Ellie inched their way up the concrete jungle gym to reach the kids.
All you do is fight with each other. Why can't you just stop?
Alan and Ellie crested the top of the buttresses, stepping onto the roof and sitting down beside Tim.
Why can't we just get out of here? We're doing the very best we can, Tim.
Ellie scooted closer to Tim.
But this is a lot harder than we thought it was gonna be. We're all just as frustrated as you are. Tim!
Lex shook her brother's shoulder, trying to get his attention.
We need to go back inside now, okay? I'm sorry that we've upset you, Tim. But I promise you won't hear another loud word from anyone else from now on. Would you come back inside now? Please?
Tim said nothing. His mind was far away, caught somewhere beyond the dark canopy of trees bristling in the wind. Alan opened his mouth, searching through his cluttered mind to find the right words to bring this child back to Earth. Then he heard it. Beyond the rattling steel wire and the bristling crowns of leaves, a brachiosaur was singing. Its guttural melody pierced the veil of night, and for a moment, serenity washed over the group. Alan slumped onto the cold concrete roof, turning to the jungle and letting the thoughts racing through his mind wash away as he cupped his hands to his lips. John Hammond wilted against the concrete wall. His eyes drifted up, and in the sky above, a portrait of stars twinkled upon the canvas of the cosmos. Hammond smiled. Truly extraordinary, isn't it? Not many places left where they shine so bright. The distant coo of the brachiosaurs carried John Hammond's spirits through the shimmering mural of that ancient sky, as memories just as far flung came drifting up from the recesses of his aging mind. I remember the first time I saw the sky like this. Not much older than Tim when it happened. My grandfather. He took me night fishing for the first time. Very exciting trip for me. On my first cast, I had probably one of the best catches I ever had in my life. Or I suppose it would have been if my rod hadn't been yanked into the water. And it wouldn't have been so bad either if I wasn't holding on to the damn thing. Hammond let loose a laugh deep from within his gut, sending him into near hysterics as his mind brought him back to the amusement of the embarrassment.
Let's just say I'm glad Grandfather was stronger than that pike. Who knows how far across the channel I would have gone if he hadn't been.
Hammond wiped away a tear, trying to compose himself through the aches of laughter.
He laid me down in the grass beyond the beach, covering me up with the most dreadful, scratchy excuse for a blanket to dry me off and warm me up. But it was under that blanket I saw them, when I really saw them.
The twinkle of the stars reflected in the eyes of John Hammond.
As a boy, they were the most beautiful things I'd ever laid my eyes on. And now, I can't imagine anything on Earth that could hope to match it.
Wrapped in one another's arms in the warm ocean breeze, the 4 rooftop dwellers were still, enchanted by the twinkle of the sky, sharing in a moment all their own. A moment they hoped would never end.
Do you think they watch the stars too?
A toothy grin found its way to John Hammond's face. Would they? Would the mystical beasts that roamed the lands of old have looked upon the stars? Would they too find themselves lost in its endless, beautiful expanse, forever beyond reach, yet only a glance away? Did they find solace in those stars, as they did now?
I wonder.
The bright, vibrant blue of the lake caught the rays of the morning sun, sending glimmers of brilliant, blinding light into Alan Grant and Ellie Sattler's eyes as they approached the steps to the visitor center. Alan and Ellie counted themselves lucky. Nothing had rushed to meet them during their trip from the bunker to the center. Though both of them always believed in hoping for the best, it was now time for them to prepare for the worst. Whatever was waiting for them in the visitor center had the power to bring everything they worked towards crashing to a halt. Alan and Ellie stood at the base of the staircase, channeling every ounce of will they had into stopping themselves from turning tail and running. Those doors, little more than an amalgamation of oak wood and glass, now exuded a dark, primal energy. Despite their continued survival, there could be no way of knowing what lay in wait as they forced their ascent, hoping to find salvation within a digital data bank. The climb up the stairs did not take as long as the two remembered. Before Alan or Ellie were anywhere near calm or collected, they were standing in front of the doors. The couple were silent, looking at each other as a whirlwind of thoughts tumbled and collided within their minds. But nothing escaped their lips. There was no time for words now. That would only delay the inevitable. Alan placed his hands upon the rough oak grain and pushed. The empty cavern that once served as the lobby seemed to stretch on for miles, its grand staircases spiraling up towards vaulted ceilings that seemed to touch the sky. The limp and twisted cables that hung from the ceiling dangled to the floor, reaching for missing pieces that lay shattered and crumbled, covering the cold stone floor in a thin layer of splinters and dust. Amidst the wreckage of the old petrified bones lay new, fresh ones. The dark, stained skeletons of what had once been two of the park's deadliest predators now rested among the husks of their ancestors. As Alan crossed the floor to the dry husk of the raptor in the center of the lobby, a banner lay twisted and crumpled on the floor before him. When dinosaurs ruled the earth. As Alan Grant thoughtlessly trod across the discarded print, he found himself crossing into another world. One where a specimen had been uncovered, and it was his duty to write its story from beyond the grave. Look how the skin has been folded back from the skeleton. And look, see here how the skin's pushed towards and away from the body. And the position of the cracks between the ribs and the spine. They must have pushed their way inside, then eaten our friend here from the inside out. Alan's eyes darted back and forth, putting together new data with every passing glance.
You see the marks on the floor where the blood pooled? Ellie looked on from a distance, her hands caressing the place where she still felt phantom bandages compressing her skull, utterly flabbergasted at how her colleague could take time out to reconstruct the gorging of this corpse. They leave nothing to waste. A true scavenger. Well, as fascinating as that sounds, Ellie slowly raised her hands to rub her scalp, making sure Alan watched closely as she did. I don't plan on participating in any more than we already have. Placing a hand on Alan's shoulder, Ellie guided him towards their destination. She shuffled slowly across the floor, willing the echo of her footsteps to be muted as her eyes fixed on the doors to the kitchen. With no way of knowing where the compsognathus swarm was, the best bet they had was to draw them out. Their hope was that if the dinos could be baited with an easy meal, then they would be kept busy long enough for Alan and Ellie to complete their search. The door to the kitchen creaked open, causing Ellie to wince at every ear-piercing scrape of metal on metal. They were too close now for things to go awry. Alan gingerly pushed the door back into its frame, turning around and creeping across the kitchen to meet Ellie. The two leaned their firearms against a nearby wall, freeing their hands as they glanced towards the heavy metal panel. The door swung out in Ellie's hand with little protest, opening to reveal the bounty inside. The corpse of the velociraptor, pressed against the door, dropped to the floor in front of them. A thin layer of ice crystals had begun to gently encase the body, preserving it just as it had been during its days roaming the jungles of the Costa Rican Isle. Its claws, cracked and splintered, had left their mark, with deep gouges decorating the inside of the door, making it a time capsule for the life cut short by the machinations of predator versus prey. A find like this could define the career of someone in his profession, and now it lay at his feet, about to become chow for its tiny brethren. Do you really think they're gonna go for it? I mean, think about how long it's been freezing in there. You think they'd prefer the Chilean sea bass? Though Alan knew Ellie's thoughts might be more probable than he would like, they had precious few options to work with. They needed to see what was on that computer, if not to find out about their rescue, then to make sure they wouldn't have to come back to the visitor center. Ellie sighed. You grab the legs, I'll get the head. Ellie winced, both from being made to stare into the vacant, milky eyes of the raptor, and from the rough, jagged hide digging into her palms as she shuffled backwards. Alan fared little better, grunting and mumbling as his hands slid up and down the scaly skin. His grip on the raptor's thighs remained precarious as he tried to keep pace with Ellie, tripping over the tail dragging limply across the floor as he did. If they got off this island, they would make sure Hammond threw some all-expenses-paid physio sessions their way. Just as Ellie began closing the distance to the door of the kitchen, she stopped in her tracks. Her sudden stop caused Alan to lurch into an uncomfortable position between the raptor's legs. Do you hear that? Ellie froze in place, becoming completely detached from the world around her as she honed in on a distant sound. Ellie, what did you— Shh! Alan attempted to ignore the ache in his arms as he waited for the auditory cue that had Ellie so on edge. But before Alan could speak his mind— Move, goddammit! The doctor's eyes locked with one another. That was a voice. One they had not heard on the island before. The raptor carcass crashed to the kitchen floor, the door nearly flying off its hinges as the duo bolted to the source of the noise. Alan barreled through the main doors to the visitor center, blinded by the morning light for a split second before taking in the new landscape.
Across the grassy fields, the massive frame of the Tyrannosaur skidded to and fro. Its jaws snapped furiously as it stumbled and swayed from the force of wave after wave of Parasaurolophus careening into it. These beasts charged and retreated around the T-Rex with everything they had, denying the monstrous predator even an inch to advance on the circle formed around their panicked and crying young. Yet despite the awe-inspiring sight of nature's work, the admirers of the prehistoric paid the great duel no mind. For within the middle of the cluster of fledglings, squirming and writhing at the terrible sound outside their wall, there was a man, pushing and shoving to escape from the prehistoric onslaught mere feet away. The man looked up towards the visitor center, his eyes meeting with those of Alan Grant and Ellie Sattler. Hey! Behind the man, an agonizing cry. A juvenile Parasaurolophus, green scales soaked in crimson. The massive jaws of the animal kingdom's ruler clamped around its throat. The beast craning its head to the sky as it savaged the prize at its feet. Alan snapped back to attention, his focus finding the man in the circle. Don't move! The man froze. Don't move! Ellie cupped her hands to her mouth. It can't see you if you don't move! A young para shuffled backwards, nearly sending the man to the ground as the Tyrannosaur's gaze lorded over the helpless flock of young. Maybe you should tell them that! Alan looked on, watching as several paras circled around the Tyrannosaur, attempting to distract it once more. When we give the word, move towards us slowly! The man stayed fixed in place, not daring to even flinch, even with the young dinosaurs throwing their mass around to the rhythm of the chaos outside. An adult para bolted past the T-Rex away from the herd, causing the reptilian tyrant to give chase. Start walking! The man shuffled forward, watching from the corner of his eye as the para passed by, the T-Rex hot in pursuit. From seemingly out of nowhere, a para appeared, ramming its hardened skull straight into the legs of the Tyrannosaur, sending it tumbling to the ground mere feet behind the man. Stop! The man stopped dead, clenching every muscle in an effort to resemble a statue. The T-Rex's gaze fixed on the man, looking on with curiosity, determining whether the tiny morsel was worthy of her interest. Though they could only barely make out the man's features from this distance, Alan and Ellie could see the sweat pouring from his brow. His lips moved softly, offering every prayer he could imagine to any being that would listen. A para charged in answer, clobbering the T-Rex in the face with ramming force, sending fragments of tooth and blood flying to the sky. Go now! The man resumed his movement, breaking out into a penguin-like shuffle as he came within reach of the stairs. The Tyrannosaur slid to a stop behind the man, having found its way back to its feet, and now, with every ounce of its hungry fury focused on him. Run! The shuffle became a sprint. The man ascended 2 steps at a time, flying up the staircase as the Tyrannosaur began closing the gap. Ellie threw the door open, pressing herself as hard as she could against it, while Alan ran to the top step to reach for the man's hand. The Tyrannosaur crashed down on the first set of stairs, sending the man stumbling as he came within reach. Alan grabbed the man by his jacket collar, throwing him through the open door as he grabbed hold of Ellie, dragging her inside behind him. The door lazily fluttered shut, cutting off their line of sight with the ravenous beast beyond. Alan and Ellie each grabbed the man by an arm, lifting him to his feet and sprinting towards the door to the kitchen, not daring to look back as the shrill cry of the beast rang out, causing the air around them to vibrate as though it too were trembling in fear.
The trio crashed in a heap on the kitchen floor, brought to an abrupt stop by the velociraptor carcass in the doorway. Ellie scrambled to her feet, throwing the kitchen door shut with her entire body. After a long spell of silence they feared would be broken at any minute, the trio allowed themselves to finally relax. Ellie let her head slump against the door as Alan extended his hand to the muddied and disheveled stranger, helping him to his feet. Jesus Christ, they weren't kidding when they said this place went to hell. The man brushed dirt off his tattered poncho, looking at the corpse of the frozen raptor in disgust. And who the hell are you exactly? What are you even doing here? The man continued to dust himself, not bothering to look at them as he spoke. Are you the only two left on this island? No, there's more of us in the bunker. Ellie paused, her eyes widening as she suddenly approached the man, clasping his arm in her vice-like grip. Are you here to get us out? Tell me right now, is Mr. John Hammond with you? Alan stared the man down. Yes, he is. The man's face froze. He stared deep into Alan's soul with an intensity that immediately set him on edge. Everything about this man was beginning to paint a picture Alan Grant wasn't sure he wanted to see. After what felt like an eternity staring into his eyes, the man's attention shifted to the walkie-talkie on Alan's belt. Get him on the radio. I have to speak with him. The thundering footfalls above sent tremors through the bunker walls. Tim and Lex Murphy sought refuge under the table, peeking out every so often to listen to the roars, bugles, and cries ringing out above. John Hammond, posted up in a metal chair, did what he could to reassure his grandchildren of their safety. Dr. Ian Malcolm looked on from his makeshift cot of supply crates and bedding, his gaze slipping in and out of focus as he alternated between fiddling with his broomstick duct tape crutch and peering at the old man's vain attempts to convince himself things were gonna be okay.
It's not unlike the time I spent in the trolley station during the war. The Germans flying overhead day and night, dropping more bombs on the city than there were fish in the sea. If we can survive something that horrific with only canned beans and dirty lamp oil, well, then this can't be quite so bad.
You know, John, there really is something to be said for how stubbornly optimistic you are. John Hammond did not bother to look Malcolm's way, opting to continue his reassuring backpats for the kids as he spoke.
And what would that be exactly?
Well, it's probably better not to say it in front of the kids. Lex collected Tim from under the table, guiding him off towards the nooks and crannies of the bunker they had explored hundreds of times now. Hammond turned to face Malcolm, too weary to bring forth the passion and fury he afforded him in their prior sparring sessions.
Just how is it you can be so staunchly dour, Mr. Malcolm? Help me understand. Why must you insist that we ought to abandon hope?
It's not that I don't want to hope, John. It's that I can't. If you get too enamored with hoping things will get better, especially in our situation, you tend to lose sight of what's happening around you, which tends to run the risk of opening yourself up to committing impressive feats of stupidity. So, until I'm able to see some tangible influence at play, I'm not gonna risk placing us in a worse position than we're already in. Malcolm's cryptic contemplation hung in the air. It seemed to fester the familiar contempt that boiled hot and high whenever the two men butted heads. But then, much to Ian's surprise, John Hammond began to do something completely unexpected. He began to chuckle.
So that's all then. If you allow yourself to hope, then you're doomed to play the fool. I must say, even for someone as rational as yourself, that is a remarkably short-sighted belief.
John, you're not hearing...
Just hear me out, if you please. I understand that this park is beyond salvation. There's simply no arguing that point. But the way I see it, we are being presented with an opportunity to take from this experience and do better.
John,
If we forfeit all hope now, if we allow ourselves to believe that we've reached the end of the road, then everything that has happened, every toil we have endured, will be for nothing. Until now, we have only been able to see distant history through a looking glass. But by bringing these creatures back from beyond, we were able to take what was once myth and make it reality. And to have the privilege to witness the immenseness of life, to be truly humbled by it as we have, is to achieve an understanding of what life is truly meant to be. The understanding that we can use what we experience to create a more enlightened future. Ian, my grandchildren are coming of age in a world that was not possible in my youth. Hope is what made the unknowable real. Hope is why I dedicated my life to realizing the potential of the impossible. And that is why, with the work we put in today, our hope will guide them into the tomorrow they truly deserve.
Malcolm's mouth hung agape. He was utterly flattened by the weight of John Hammond's words. Through all of the long-winded speeches, all of the great leaps forward, and all of the pain and death that had stained them, John Hammond was still as good as blind. You really don't get it, do you? Let me frame this in a way that you can appreciate. Imagine if you went to sleep tonight, then you woke up 65 million years in the future. What would happen? Actually, no, let me tell you. You would be completely at a loss with your surroundings. You wouldn't have any ability to discern the natural order of what to seek out and what to avoid. Odds are that you wouldn't even be able to breathe the air around you. You would instantly think you didn't belong, because you don't. Every conceivable result of that experiment is completely catastrophic. Yet you apply those parameters to resurrecting the dinosaurs, or the woolly mammoth, or even the dodo, and you think yourself a visionary, despite understanding less than nothing about what you're doing. And even with all the little voices in your head trying to remind you that what you're doing is wrong, you pushed your idea forward, attached puppets to your strings, then allowed yourself to be told your word was gospel. To say that you're working towards this grand, inspired future without having a blueprint for it is utterly irresponsible. The future lying in wait for your grandkids, for my kids, isn't up to us to decide. We have a responsibility to address and correct problems we face, current predicament included. But even with your all-powerful tools and complex schemes on how to utilize them, the future you're dreaming about is subject to the same change and chaos that, well, Dr. Malcolm threw his arms in the air, exhibiting the invisible carnage that had brought them to where they now sat. The world and everything in it went silent, waiting in anticipation as Ian Malcolm leaned towards the former park administrator, poised to close the book on their battles with some harsh words of wisdom. Sometimes what's out of our reach needs to stay that way. How many more have to die for you to realize that? Hammond didn't respond. He'd poured so much of himself into this failing cause, to the betterment of mankind and its understanding of what was once impossible to know. Of course, there were many tribulations along the way, many instances where Hammond was forced to question everything he had done, but for all that he and the family he created had achieved, how could he believe that such an undeniable triumph was doomed to fail? Good work would bear ripe fruit. That is how it had always been for him. But with something so big,
Something larger than life in every sense of the word. Was it too big for the likes of him?
John Hammond? Mr. John Hammond.
The crackle of the walkie-talkie on the table startled John out of his stupor. He fumbled for the electronic mouthpiece, perplexed by the voice that didn't belong to anyone he knew.
Yes, and to whom am I speaking?
What came from the walkie-talkie next caused the blood in John Hammond's veins to turn to ice.
Someone you're going to listen to very carefully.
As Alan grabbed a hold of Ellie, throwing her behind him, his mind raced, taking him through a whirlwind of faces and the emotions within them. In the eyes of Ellie Sattler, there was love, an unyielding dedication and expectance to push for the greatest heights. In Tim and Lex Murphy, there was joy, an unyielding purity that came with the passion for any and all things life had to offer. In Dr. Malcolm, he saw confidence, the sureness that came from a lifetime of unraveling the most complex of machinations and breaking them down until they were as easy to understand as breathing. In the face of the Tyrannosaurus, he saw drive, summoned from the most primal and urgent need to survive no matter what. Yet in the eyes of the man in front of him, Alan saw nothing at all. A gaze hollow, but unmoving. Much like the barrel of the pistol the man pointed at Alan Grant's head. Alan held up his arms, making himself as large as he could to keep Ellie behind him. Despite the ferocious glare he gave, it took everything he had not to crack under the weight of the fear buoying up in his stomach. The glint of his shotgun and Ellie's rifle by the freezer door caught his eye. Ellie's glance found them too, but both knew it was useless. They would be dead if they even thought about it.
Alan! Ellie!
Lex's voice warbled desperately from the other side of the radio, which the strange man held to his ear in his spare hand.
Grandpa, do something!
Lex, don't! The man leveled his gun at Ellie's head, prompting a desperate lunge from Alan that was quickly stopped by cold steel pressed against his forehead.
Listen to me.
Hammond's voice shook slightly, but remained composed.
Whatever it is you want, we are willing to discuss terms. There is no need for this to end in violence.
That's gonna depend how reasonable you are, Hammond. I'm only here for your embryos. The stranger cocked his head to the sky, listening for the sounds of the outside world. When nothing came back to meet him, he waved his pistol, motioning Alan and Ellie in the direction of the control room. So long as I leave with what I came for. The stranger beckoned his captives down the hallway, keeping his gun close behind them as they arrived at the central nervous system of Jurassic Park. Then you'll have nothing to worry about. Alan and Ellie glanced the control center for any signs of movement, anxiously waiting for any sign that the compies would return. There was nothing. They would have no intervening distraction to rescue them from this captor. At the very least, it meant their ankles would remain intact.
You would truly come all this way for arbitrary riches?
Consider it taking care of unfinished business. Ellie's eyes scanned the control room floor, landing on the shotgun discarded in their encounter with the Raptors. Now tell me, how do we open decontamination? The door to decontamination requires an authorized key card to open. At the top of the room, with the triple bank of computer monitors, you should be able to— Don't much feel like playing I Spy if your pets are gonna be snapping at my heels, Hammond. Now tell me how we're gonna get decontamination open. A brief pause ensued, with only static to reassure the desperate captives before he spoke again. If you go to the workstation in the closest right corner of the bottom level, you'll be able to access park security functions. You can disable the lock from there. All right, stand by.
The stranger stepped in front of Alan and Ellie. I hope for your sake one of you knows how to work a computer. Even as the pistol once again raised towards them, Ellie silently found herself looking at the shotgun, then back at Alan, who shook his head in protest. Then she turned back towards the man. I do. Congratulations. The man stepped backwards, beckoning Ellie to follow him down to the bottom level. You've just earned a promotion. The man walked backwards, his eyes fixed on Ellie as she walked with him. Though her eyes remained fixed on the man, her mind was drawn to the gun on the floor, and the hope that it would turn the tables. So here's what's gonna happen, Ellie swore under her breath as the man scooped the shotgun from off the floor. You're going to shut down the locks to decontamination and the cold storage chamber. Then, you're going to turn off the perimeter fences between us and the east dock. Alan's eyes widened. Are you out of your mind? If you turn those fences off, then we'll have no protection from— Do try to stay focused on completing your work. The stranger racked the pump of the shotgun, sending a round into the chamber, primed and ready as it pointed at Alan's chest. Tall and handsome won't be very happy if you try anything. As Ellie's fingers danced across the keyboard, the man ushered Alan towards embryo cold storage. Alan suppressed a groan as the cold steel jammed into one of his vertebrae. He looked back to the control room. His eyes met with Ellie's, and he offered the most reassuring glance he could. He wanted her to know that they would get through this. He wanted her to feel that everything was gonna be okay. But in her eyes, he saw what he had seen in his own every day in the mirror of the bunker's bathroom. The warm comfort of hope would not be making an appearance today. A soft click emanated from the door as the lock released, and a soft pop resounded from Alan Grant's spine as the shotgun dug into his back. Open it. Alan gripped the slick stainless steel of the door, sliding it to the side, feeling a gust of cold air wash over him. So now that you're about to bag one of science's most radical achievements, have you thought about what people will think of you when they find out what you did? You and I both know that this mess with Hammond's circus is gonna get far more attention from people than a few missing test tubes ever will. Open. Now. Alan found himself shoved through the final door to cold storage before it even finished opening. Turning to face his captor, he found a metallic cylinder thrust into his hand. Put the embryos in that, one of each. Without peeling his eyes from the dark pit of the shotgun barrel, Alan pulled out the storage units. Despite the freezing of his fingertips, he found himself burning from the inside out as he carefully lifted each embryo from its cradle. After what seemed the blink of an eye to Alan, all 15 samples were collected. 15 genetic templates now sat in the palm of his hand. 15 lives that could create a whole new world if given the chance. But today would not allow these creatures such fortune. Good. The man swiped the cylinder from Alan's hand, depositing it in the side pocket of the backpack he wore. Let's go. Ellie withdrew from her place at Nedry's workstation, watching Alan return to the control room. Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Hammond. We'll be on our way now.
If you are suggesting what I think you are...
Ding, ding, ding! I would say you're the winner of the $1 million prize, but that would be a drop in the bucket for a man of your standing, wouldn't it?
Sir, please, if you can find it in you to have a shred of empathy...
Don't get pious with me, Grandpa. This isn't a negotiation. I'll be needing their company in case I run into one of your little pets on my way out of here. You of all people should appreciate the importance of covering your bases.
Sir, please. We have children here. We have wounded here. Are you truly so cold to leave those in dire need to fend for themselves?
Sweat began to beat on Alan's brow. Hammond was losing control of himself. This wasn't boding well for them. Oh, spare me the melodrama. The people on the mainland haven't shut up about you since all this went down. You're days away from getting a rescue party sent your way, so try not to take a stroke until then. Now, if you want to try and take any more pot shots at trying to piss me off... Ellie leaned in, waiting for Hammond to swoop in with a trump card that would see them all put to rest. Instead, silence met her ears. I figured as much. We'll be in touch. Without another word, the man waved the shotgun, guiding his captives towards the door to the main lobby. As the three stepped past the threshold of the control room, Ellie straightened her pink button-up shirt, pulling it down past her shorts, and praying it would stay loose enough to hide the glass jolt bottle in her waistband. Does it still hurt? It's not so bad as long as I don't touch it, move it, or walk on it. Ian Malcolm ran his finger gingerly along the fabric of his pants, feeling the outline of the scar underneath. I can't believe someone would steal dinosaurs before they were even born. Why would someone do that? Well, Tim, the dinosaurs coming back to life is quite an exciting thing. Some people are so excited by it that they want a piece of it for themselves. But those are little babies they're stealing. Don't they know that's wrong? Malcolm smiled. This kid was gonna be a firecracker when he grew up. That is a good question, Tim, and I honestly wish more people asked questions like that. Malcolm glanced at Hammond, who leaned his head against the wall in the corner. Unfortunately, sometimes people care too much about helping themselves to remember right from wrong. Lex was distant, her eyes wandering every which way across the bunker as her mind floated aimlessly through a void of worry. Dr. Grant and Dr. Sattler aren't coming back, are they? Ian looked towards Hammond. The man he saw there was a hollow imitation of what Malcolm had grown accustomed to. He'd been so horribly beaten down by the very thing he brought to life that he could no longer bear to look at himself. So he looked at the wall, leaving Ian to struggle with what to tell these kids alone. He turned back to them. Hey now, I think you and I both know that those two have been in tougher spots than this. I mean, if they can take care of all of us, they'll have no problem taking care of themselves. Hammond glanced at Dr. Malcolm. The notion of them coming away from this was a distant dream now. But in spite of it all, Hammond had stood tall. He held on with all his might, knowing that no matter how small it might seem, there was a chance for them. But after so long holding on, his soul was heavy with the burden he carried. He was almost out of hope. But now, as he looked on at this display of care, to see that someone as unmoving as Dr. Malcolm could find it in themselves to reach for hope, then who would he be to turn away from it? Hammond's heart skipped a beat. He turned to the phone on the wall, not quite believing the sound he heard. Dumbstruck, Hammond reached for the phone, pulling it off the cradle as the others looked on, wide-eyed and breathless. Hammond stood silent, his mind conjuring the best greeting he could for this unexpected caller. Yes? Mr. Hammond, is that you, sir? Hammond felt a wave of tranquility wash over him. Never before had the voice on the other end felt so reassuring to him. Oh, Henry, it's good to hear your voice. Likewise, you had everyone scared to death over here. Henry, I hate to be blunt, but tell me you have some good news for us. Of course, sir. Apologies things took so long. We've been back and forth with the Department of Transportation since the incident. Fortunately, the board of directors requisitioned a private military contractor to extract you off the island. They should be en route to pick you up as we speak. I wanted to be the one to tell you. Hammond sighed, feeling the unknowable weight on his shoulders finally ease.
Bless you, Dr. Henry Wu. I cannot understate how much I am indebted to you.
You will always have my support, Mr. Hammond, and I speak for all of us when I say we will always be here with you. Hammond smiled to himself, his gaze lifting up to the ceiling, and yet his mind was elsewhere, still trapped within the hell on earth that the scientific miracle of Ela Nublar had become. How could he face himself after this? How would he be able to reconcile the horrors that chasing this dream had caused? Or the pain that was sure to come? I wonder. Excuse me, sir? Hammond smirked at his slip, but continued on, allowing his private thoughts to be heard.
Tell me, Henry, this dream of mine to bring back the dead from beyond, was it worth the while?
What are you trying to say, sir? Your vision has been an inspiration for all of us. To give the gift of life to something that shouldn't be able to have it. How could anyone turn away from such an incredible achievement?
But what did we really hope to gain by seeing it through? To take eons old skeletons and to remake them based on what we thought they ought to be. We may have known what we wanted, but we never fully respected what our work would impact, did we?
Maybe you're right. Maybe we didn't fully understand what might happen. But what we did know was that we had a responsibility to push the envelope of what genetic science was capable of. You yourself always told us that our work should reflect the pride we take in being purveyors of this scientific knowledge. I understand your reservations. What happened at Site A is truly an unimaginable tragedy, but we can still come back. We can speak with investors. We can diversify our research. Agriculture, medicine, defense. We can go anywhere with the work we've done in genome sequencing. And one day, we will be able to look back at what's happened here and realize it led to something better. Whether our work in cloning is able to continue or not, I assure you that you will have the continued support of every single one of us.
Perhaps the only thing left to do is to make sure we never allow ourselves to attempt something like this again.
As I said, you will have our support. Let's get you back safe and sound. Then, when you feel ready to do so, we will discuss what course our future should take. I'll see you soon, Mr. Hammond.
Take care of yourself, Henry.
The distant footfalls of Goliath beasts mixed in with the chirping of cicadas and the cooing of songbirds. The sounds of life from above and beyond melded perfectly into the gentle rustle of leaves dancing on the breeze. Nature, and the symphony it created, had the power to put even the most wayward of minds at peace. But as Alan walked along the service road that led to the east dock, he could hear nothing but the crushing of gravel underfoot to accompany the pounding of his heart. With every step they took, Alan's heart raced ever faster. Alan had never felt so helpless before in his life, for he was now at the mercy of a decision that was not his to make. Would the man with the shotgun at his back load them into a boat, carting them off to who knows where to be held against their will as a bargaining chip? Would the man decide they weren't worth the while and leave them heaped in a ditch with a chest full of buckshot? Would Ellie gamble their survival on how fast she could be with the jolt bottle hidden in her waistband? It was impossible for him to know, but what Alan feared more than any of this was that their fate would not be decided by any of these causes. Every thought that crossed through Alan's mind, every feeling emerging from his gut, every rustle of the thicket, every faint tap and click told Alan one thing. They were being hunted. "Stop!" Alan and Ellie froze in place, turning to face their captor. The man knelt down, his eyes fixed on his prisoners as he opened his backpack, retrieving a canteen from inside. As he held the canteen to his lips, Alan looked over his shoulder, taking note of the structure through the trees. The colossal dome towered high above the surrounding trees, its lattice of beams, wire, and glass catching the sun's rays, returning a brilliant reflection that caught the eye as much as it stunned it. But the most stunning feature to Alan's gaze was one that made his stomach turn. Halfway up the structure, the carefully arranged web of beams had been obliterated. A massive hole of indeterminate size now lay where protective structure once was. The enclosure was wide open, and odds were, whatever had been held there was out. We need to keep moving. Shut up. Ellie followed Alan's eyes, her own widening in fear.
We're too exposed here. If we stay too long, we risk...
We stay stopped until I say otherwise. Anyone or anything that has a problem with that can issue their complaints here. The man motioned to the shotgun at his feet. The breaking of the branch sent the man diving for the shotgun. Whipping around with dizzying speed, the man took aim, scanning the bushes and willing whatever lurked within to reveal itself. Ellie saw her opening. Though Alan reached to grab a hold of her, he was too late. Ellie was on the move, bottle in hand, charging head first to take their captor out. Her eyes and the man's met, and in a flash, he spun on his heels, clubbing Ellie across the head with the receiver of the gun. Ellie crumpled to the ground, blood flowing into her eyes as she groaned at the whirlwind of pain in her head. She blindly flailed on the ground, searching for her weapon. The man raised his gun, Ellie clear in his sights as his finger reached for the trigger. The shot scattered through the bush, knocked off course by the last-minute intervention of Alan. Alan clambered for the gun, throwing right hooks into the man's temple as he clamped down on the barrel, feeling the heat steaming from under the handguard. The man brought his head down on Alan, smashing into the bridge of his nose, leaving his vision clouded with stars. Alan brought his knee up into the man's gut as fast as he could, and though he heard the wind leave his lungs, the man did not falter. The two exchanged blow for blow, neither man giving each other an inch of breathing room as they struggled to take control of the gun. The man secured his grip around it, thrusting it upwards and delivering a hard metallic uppercut to the underside of Alan's jaw. Alan's skull rang, his vision darkened, and he crumpled to the rough gravel floor. The man loomed above, swinging the gun in Alan's direction. He felt the barrel above his head, and he knew that this was it. Alan Grant closed his eyes as he felt steel press into his forehead. "Don't move!" Alan opened his eyes. Though his vision was still blurred, he could distinguish the silhouette of the man holding the gun to his head, as well as that of a woman in a pink shirt. Ellie had gotten hold of the man's pistol from his waistband, holding it to his head as she wiped the blood from her eyes. "Get up, Alan! We're leaving!" Alan scrambled to his feet. He reached for the man's pocket, pulling the radio from it as he backed away. As Alan slowly retreated, watching the man for the slightest movement, he found it, but not from him. Behind the man, the outline of a creature, roughly 3 feet tall, emerged from the thicket, mere feet behind the man. Alan froze. He recognized this creature. He shouldn't have been seeing it. But in spite of that, the creature Alan had chased his whole life to learn about had found its way back into his life. Ellie found her way to Alan's side, shaking him to attention and ushering him backwards even further. Side by side, they crept away,
not daring to avert their gaze for even a second from the young velociraptor as it skulked into place behind the man. The man sank down to one knee, the raptor chomping down on his leg, ripping and tearing as he flung his head back and forth wildly. Without another word, Alan and Ellie turned on their heels and ran. The sound of gunshots spurred them forward even faster, their run becoming a sprint. Neither looked back, not allowing themselves to see anything but the road in front of them as they ran further and further away from the coming slaughter. The man drove the stock of the shotgun into the dirt, leaning into it and attempting to use it to find his way back to his feet. The searing pain running up his leg sent his jaw into lockup as he attempted to find his footing. He tore the leaves from the bushes, hobbling into the foliage, attempting to chase down the runt that had made a snack out of his shin. "You better keep running, you little bastard!" The man dragged his leg limply along, the blood trickling across the jungle floor as he walked. Several feet away, behind a fallen tree, a single yellow eye tracked him. The man's face contorted with rage as he lined up the eye with his gun sight. The sound of an empty chamber caused the raptor to flee, leaving the man to stare in rage at his weapon's failure to function. "Oh well, just means I'm gonna enjoy killing you even more." The man moved to resume his pursuit, but in the corner of his eye, something bristled. "You really think I wouldn't notice that, you little bastard?" The man turned and was immediately met by the silhouette of the raptor emerging from the bush. But before he could react, a thud sounded out. Turning back to where the yellow eye once was, the raptor had made itself visible, perched atop the fallen tree. The second raptor crept towards him. Another emerged from his right, then another on his left, then two more behind. The man turned to and fro, attempting to gauge what his next move should be, but everywhere he looked, green scales and white teeth were there to meet him. The circle closed in, and the man became trapped. No. In the blink of an eye, the man found himself face down in the dirt, the force of the raptor's body launching him to the ground. White-hot burns erupted across his body as he felt 7 sets of teeth begin to sink in. His vision went white as he cried out, screaming out all the air in his lungs in response to the roaring pain eating him up from the inside. Tears streamed down his face as the sound of tearing and gulping echoed from behind. And while the pain amplified in some places, he felt it cease altogether in others. The man croaked hoarsely, nothing left in his lungs to give, and as he felt the raptors continue their vicious frenzy on his body, his vision slowly faded to black, and his cries slowly faded to silence. John Hammond felt a smile cross his face as he shuffled towards the helicopter setting down in the clearing. At long last, he would be free of this place. At long last, he and his family would be safe. A man donning a beret exited the helicopter, flanked on each side by armored men with rifles, making his way to John as the rest of the helicopter's heavily armed payload disembarked. "Are you John Hammond?" The man crossed the field towards John, beckoning his escort to make their way to the bunker as he closed the gap. "I am, sir, and I must say I'm truly delighted to make your acquaintance, Mr. Captain Wagner. I was informed by our mutual contact that there were 10 of you on the island at the time of the incident. Is that correct?" "Down to 6 now, I'm afraid. 2 of my colleagues were taken, but they were able to escape. They informed me that they are currently east of the aviary. I fear they may be in danger still." "And the rest of you?" "You will find them in the bunker. Those of us who survived, anyway." The captain turned away for a moment, chattering unintelligible commands to the thrum of the helicopter's blades. Hammond watched as 6 men broke off from the perimeter, making their way to the east as the captain returned to Hammond's side. "All right, Mr. Hammond. Once we clear that bunker and load up, we're going to take you back to the mainland. My squad will search the area for your friends until we get you back to Costa Rica. Then myself and the rest of my men will return and complete the search." Hammond clasped the captain's hand in his own, his smile widening as tears began to well in his eyes. "Thank you, Captain Wagner. I can never hope to repay you enough." "Don't mention it, Mr. Hammond." Captain Wagner placed a hand on Hammond's shoulder, giving him a smile of his own. "It's time to bring you home." John felt a slight tremor reverberate through the amber medallion on his cane. His smile melted away as his eyes drifted to the trees. The sky above became dark as countless birds took to the skies, purging the forest of life. Hammond crept towards the tree line, feeling an all too familiar pit form in his gut. But this time, it threatened to swallow him whole. The vibration cut through John Hammond's hand once more as Captain Wagner approached. "Hammond, what is that?" Hammond was silent, his heart in free fall as he watched the column of armed men creep out of view inside the tree line. The whir of the helicopter grew faint as the ringing in Hammond's ears took hold. Oh no. The fronds above bristled in response to the Goliath footfalls beyond the trees, and for a terrible, sickening moment, the world became still. And then, the gunfire began. Lex Murphy closed her eyes, stunned by the light of a blazing sun greeting her as the bunker door flew open. The soldier grabbed her shoulder tightly, causing her to yelp from the squeeze. "Get moving, kid!" Lex grabbed her brother's hand, holding on tight as she ran through the grass towards the helicopter. The edge of the clearing where the chopper lay waiting had erupted into an all-out fight to the death, and at the center of it all, the Angel of Death, towering behemoth of scales and teeth, lay waste to everything in sight. Though they sounded miles away, the screams of soldiers assaulted Lex's senses with perfect clarity. Bullets glanced off the Tyrannosaur's hide like raindrops on a window pane, as the soldiers were methodically run down by the hungry beast, one by one. One by one, they were taken up in its jaws as their screams echoed on, as the Tyrannosaur stained the grass around them red with every victim it claimed. Lex clasped Tim's hand ever tighter, willing the endless distance to the helicopter loading door to be closed. "Keep going, kid! You're almost there!" Lex's armed escort broke away, moving to engage the massive beast that had set its sights on larger prey. Prey that they depended on for their escape. Lex could see the open doors of the helicopter, almost close enough to touch now. Suddenly, Lex was hit with a torrent of fluid from above, stopping her dead in her tracks as she was blinded. She bent to her knees, and though Tim shook her desperately, pleading with her to keep moving, she couldn't. Lex was dazed as she brought her hands up to her eyes, cleaning away the fluid that blinded her. As her eyes opened again, the sight of her hands, soaked in red, were the first thing to greet her. Then Lex looked up, and to her horror, the helicopter had lifted off the ground, taking flight to the bright blue skies above, taking flight without them. Lex screamed up to the heavens, begging their rescue not to abandon them. But the only answer she received was the screams of dying men. "Come on, Lex! We have to get back to the bunker! Let's go!"
Coming to long enough to hear the terror in her brother's voice, Lex turned, ready to run back to the safety of the underground. But it was too late. Between the children and their last chance at safety, she stood. The Tyrannosaurus Rex loomed high above them, the malice within the burning yellow of its eyes, studying them with callous disregard. The king of predators from ages past now advanced towards its helpless targets. The claws of its feet tore away at the earth as it shook it with every advancing step. Lex squeezed her brother tightly in her arms, casting her eyes down from the columns of crimson-soaked teeth as they began to part.
Hey you!
Lex's eyes opened. Behind the T-Rex, Lex saw a man waving frantically. This guardian angel, all dressed in white, waved his cane to and fro as the towering beast turned, its interest now drawn to John Hammond.
Run away, Grandpa! Run away! Take Tim and run, Lex! That's it! I'm right here, you big oaf!
The T-Rex, now captivated by Hammond's show, began to close the gap with him.
Grandpa! No!
Hammond offered one more smile for his grandchildren, who could do nothing but watch as his own creation closed in on him.
I love you, forever and always. Now go!
Lex felt Tim shrivel into her, convulsing as his tears began to fall. Lex grabbed his hand once more.
Don't look back, Timmy. Don't look back.
They ran together, rushing for the tree line ahead. They ran, the tears flowing down their faces, blinding them as their bodies carried them as fast as they could go. Together, they ran, away from the Tyrannosaur and its time-stopping, earth-shattering roar. Ian Malcolm hobbled on his crutch up the bunker steps, pushing on the door with his shoulder. Yeah, some help our rescuers are. Despite his triumph against the stairs, any sense of victory was cut short by what lay beyond the door. The Tyrannosaur lumbered through an empty paddock, searching for any signs of life to snuff out. Not daring to make the same mistake twice, Malcolm froze in place. After a moment of aimless lumbering, the dinosaur made its way towards the tree line, set on beginning a new hunt. Even after the Tyrannosaur disappeared from view, Ian remained motionless. The air caught in his lungs, and sweat formed on his brow as his vision blurred. Frozen there, Ian Malcolm's mind slowly began to implode. Where are the others? Where did the helicopter go? What happened to everyone? What will the T-Rex do now? What do you do now, Ian? What do you do? What do you do? What do you do? What do you— Hey! Ian snapped to attention. A man approached Ian from the trees behind the bunker, holding his left shoulder, grimacing as he limped towards him. The beret on his head sloughed precariously off to the side, caked in the same dirt that streaked his face. Ian Malcolm looked him over as he came closer. The dirt, tinged with streaks of red, caused Ian's brain to begin plummeting into shock once again. Whatever that was, it wasn't just dirt.
Hey, I'm talking to you, Gigantor!
The snapping of the man's fingers brought him to attention, and he meekly allowed himself to be loaded into the gas jeep by the door. What a goddamn nightmare this place is! The man rambled incessantly, the red streaks on his face now imitated by the rush of blood turning him beet red. A theme park full of live dinosaurs! What kind of Darwin Award-winning stupidity is that? Huh? Ian stared at the man blankly. What happened back there? What happened back there? What happened back there?
Jesus Christ, let me tell you. What happened is that big broody son of a bitch just single-handedly wiped my team off the face of the earth. You count yourself lucky you missed it. What happened to Hammond? What happened to the kids? What happened to them? Don't know, don't care. They're as good as dead. The only thing I care about at this point is getting the last of my guys out of here. Wait a minute, no. You can't just leave them behind. We have to go back and find them. We need to make sure that Are you out of your mind? What do you think is gonna happen if we go back and find that big bastard waiting for us? Do you have even the faintest idea what that thing could do to you? Ian looked down at his splinted leg, the wound upon it still as itchy and tender as it ever was. He offered no reply. We have to gather up my team, assuming any of them are still left. The man turned hard on the wheel, drifting through the twists and turns of the gravel road ahead. Then, assuming my pilot remembers what's good for him and does his job, we're going to sink this island to the bottom of the damn ocean. Listen. Ian reached over, placing a hand on the man's forearm. By all means, we should go find your team, and after your role is complete, you're free to lay waste to the island as you please. But you came to rescue me and my colleagues. And if those kids are off fending for themselves right now, then we can't just assume they're dead and gone. They're counting on us to keep them safe, and that is exactly what we need. A deafening crash jolted the two upright. On the hood of the Jeep, maw gaping wide, a winged creature had perched atop the hood of the moving vehicle, completely engulfing the view ahead. Its long triangular beak lurched forward, latching on to the head of the man in the beret. Ian sprung from the back seat, throwing his fists into the creature's face as the man's muffled screams echoed inside its jaws. The creature twisted its head to and fro, refusing to let go of its prize. As Ian reached for the bird's throat, a sickening crunch rang out. Ian screamed, his vision going blank as the jagged wound sent white-hot flames rippling through his leg. As the winged beast began to drive its beak up and down through the man's body, Ian caught sight of his crutch in the front seat. Grabbing hold and winding up as adrenaline coursed through his veins and rage poured through his heart, he swung down, shattering the broomstick into a million splinters over the creature's head. The beast slumped down on top of the man in its jaws without a sound, and in doing so, revealed the end of the road ahead. Well, shit. In an instant, the vehicle bowed down as it hit the ditch, and Dr. Ian Malcolm was airborne. As Ian glided through the air, he saw he wasn't alone in flight. In the sky above, a small flock of the giant prehistoric birds circled above, watching Ian curiously. Ian felt a strange calm wash through him as he watched the creatures catch the wind, swooping up and down as they looked upon the world below. Ian felt one more smirk set on his face as the ground below rushed up to meet him. The world rushing by came to a halt, and as darkness overtook him, Ian's flight carried on as he drifted through the darkness, up and away from the world below. A dull thumping sounded out as Ellie tore across the jungle floor. Though pins and needles tore up and down her calves, she pressed on, madly trying to stay ahead of the dull roar emanating from behind. Wiping a trickle of blood from her face, she glanced over at Alan, not far behind as the rumble came close to overtaking them. But as the archaeologists ran for fear of their lives, they failed to notice that the closer the rumble came, the more it seemed to come from overhead. Soon the beat of the rotating wings sent tremors through the air overhead. As the two turned to face their pursuer, they were greeted by the cylindrical metallic body of the helicopter, racing across the canopy overhead towards them. But before they could react further, the aircraft was gone, madly racing away from the island towards open waters. Now the two stopped dead, speechless at what they had just witnessed. That was the last chance they had to get out of there, and now it had left them behind. Ellie unholstered the pistol from her waistband, firing blindly as she raged against the vehicle of their salvation, leaving them to the vultures. She screamed, louder and louder, until her voice drowned out the shots of the gun. Their only chance, and it had left them to die. "Ellie!" Alan's voice in her ear snapped Ellie back to earth. She looked over at the gun. It was now empty in her hand. Alan took Ellie's free hand, gingerly rubbing the surface of the hand with his thumb, as he would when he tried to soothe the splinters and cracks caused from long days digging in dry climates. "We should go, Ellie." As the tears of anger began to flow, Ellie looked at Alan, as she began to wonder where they would even go. Then, just as quickly as the question entered her mind, Ellie found her answer. "The dock!" Ellie grabbed Alan's hand, pulling him back towards the jungle as she began running once more. Ellie poured every ounce of energy her body could muster through her legs as she ran, despite branches and thorns hitting and scratching, despite the ache of her feet as the gravel caused her ankles to roll, despite running long and far enough to see the endless blue sky at the end of the road. Ellie kept running. Then, as she broke through the clearing that led to the dock, she came to a screeching halt, and all the energy she had left evacuated her body with the force of an erupting volcano. The dock was empty. Ellie looked across the pier, the vast expanse of steel and concrete walkway reaching out to the horizon, beckoning anything on the open water into its open docks. But there was not a single boat to be found. Alan skidded to a halt, and Ellie slumped where she stood as she felt Alan's breath leave his lungs. He... Alan pointed aimlessly towards the open waters, fighting the whirlwind of thoughts racing through his mind as the words refused to leave his lips. He never had a ride waiting. Though Ellie had succeeded in finishing Alan's thought, it was an action with no reward. They were stuck. All they had left now was an entire island of prehistoric abominations, hunting them to the ends of the earth. And they drew ever closer. From behind, a rhythmic growl echoed, redirecting Ellie and Alan's gaze into the thicket. Two small yellow eyes glowed, punching holes through the foliage and through the souls of its prey. Ellie bolted, taking Alan's hand and dragging him towards the coastline. A second raptor emerged from the trees in front of them, sending them screeching to a stop. As they turned to the forest, a third came into view. Alan and Ellie scrambled backwards. The two found themselves back to back, circling around each other, searching for an escape route. Every direction, a new set of eyes was there to meet theirs. 7 pairs of golden yellow, encircling the 2 sets of blue, pushing them closer and closer together until they were pushed into each other. Nowhere left to go, nothing left to do, only to watch as the young family of raptors unhinged their jaws and prepared to feast. A large flash of brown barreled across the road, trampling 2 of the golden-eyed raptors into paste as it lumbered to a stop. The raptors whirled around in unison, rapidly advancing upon the leathery tank that bugled as it kicked up gravel, preparing its next charge. Ellie stood in awe, feeling a brief sensation of relief, as she watched the Triceratops wage war on the predator pack. Alan pulled on Ellie's forearm, ushering her to make a break for the trees as the Triceratops impaled one of its opponents on its horns. As the remaining raptors circled the trike, desperately clambering to take the hulking beast down, the paleoscientists broke into a sprint. And as the jungle grew thicker before them, the cries of the battle became fainter behind them. Alan pulled on the festering mass of flesh with all the strength he had left. Even with Ellie pushing from inside the Jeep, the massive frame of what was formerly Dennis Nedry wouldn't budge. Alan tugged hard, fighting the urge to gag as Nedry's remains tested his physical and mental strength. At long last, the putrid corpse dislodged, toppling into the thick slick of mud with a wet thud. Alan climbed into the driver's seat, closing the blood-stained door, gritting his teeth as he attempted to ignore the necrotized sludge he sat in. His hand reached for the car key, which he turned in the ignition. Nothing. Alan turned the key once more, holding it down to ensure it would fall into place. Not even a sputter. Come on, come on. Alan turned the key over and over, willing the car to find even an ounce of juice to send it roaring back to life. It was no use. The car was dead. Alan slumped back in his seat. What kind of miracle was he meant to pull out of thin air to make this right? Ellie slumped back in the passenger seat, extending her hand to Alan, her eyes becoming glassy. Alan took her hand in his, gently clutching it, running his thumb along the top of her hand, a weak smile forming as tears of his own began to well up in his eyes. Ellie smiled. I just keep trying to picture them with feathers. Alan chuckled. They really are an awfully naked bunch, aren't they? As the tears began to fall, Ellie let loose a laugh. Imagine getting to meet your ancestors who've been dead for ages, only to have them tell you to cover up. Good heavens, Martha, have you no decency? Think about the children, will ya? Laughter echoed. Tears flowed, and for a merciful moment, the two could leave behind the terror beyond the car doors. As the laughter died down, Alan and Ellie looked into one another. In that moment, it really began to sink in. We aren't getting off this island, are we? Ellie's hand went limp in Alan's grip. Alan said nothing. What could he really say? Ellie swallowed hard, her gaze drifting off into the distance. So what happens next? We just sit back and let everything fall apart? I'm not sure it's up to us anymore. I'm not sure if it ever was. Well, at least part of Hammond's dream came true. You can sure as hell reach out and touch them. Yeah. If only they didn't touch back. Maybe then it's... So dinosaurs walk the earth once more. What's humanity gonna do to survive that? I don't know. I guess life will have to find a way. Ellie grabbed hold of Alan's hand, pulling it into her chest as she looked at him. Alan turned, his eyes glazed, drained of whatever fight he had left. Though he tried to force a smile, he could no longer hold it, and as quickly as it found its way to his face, it was gone. Alan Grant and Ellie Sadler sat together in that Jeep, hand in hand. Their minds, so horridly damaged from the trauma, came untethered from their bodies, drifting up into the bright blue skies above. Though their bodies remained on Earth, their souls took flight, taking hold of the final and only chance they would have to leave this place. As these students of the past sat still, warmed in each other's empty embrace, the jungle slowly moved in to claim their souls. The ravenous cadence of soft hisses closing in around them. And that's a wrap, ladies and gentlemen. Not gonna lie, this ended up being way more work than I was anticipating. Jurassic Park is one of those series that just has so much going on beneath the surface, and there's a lot that goes into understanding the workings of a series that seems to just be about dinosaurs. I feel like I learned a lot about this franchise and the community around it making this. And despite how much working and reworking that went into making it, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. But what about you guys? What sort of stories would you tell if you were given the reins to Jurassic Park? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And if you have any ideas for other movies and the potential what-if reimaginings for them, feel free to post that down below as well. I can say for certain I have plenty more of these stories on the way, and I hope to maybe see some of you guys delivering your own takes as well. Thank you all for tuning in, and until our paths cross again, well, I'll see you when I see ya.